This country breaks rules that geography itself follows. A place where hurricanes almost never land, even though they should. Where the ground looks solid, but is actually a lake you can walk on. And somehow, most people have never heard of it. This is Trinidad and Tobago. And these are 40 facts that sound completely impossible. Fact 1. Here's something that shouldn't exist. There is a lake in Trinidad made entirely of natural asphalt. It stretches across more than 100 acres, roughly 90 football fields. In some places, it descends over 250 feet straight down. This is Pitch Lake, and it is alive. It slowly churns, replenishes, and moves. It is the largest natural asphalt deposit on Earth. Fact 2. Imagine walking across a surface that's technically liquid. That's exactly what you do at Pitch Lake. The asphalt is thick enough to support a person, most of the time. But stray into the wrong spot and you begin to slowly sink. Explorers have disappeared into it. Mastodon teeth and giant sloth fossils have been churned back up. Fact 3. Every major city on the U.S. East Coast has a piece of Trinidad in it. The streets of New York City, Washington, D.C., and parts of London were originally paved with asphalt dug from Pitch Lake. Walter Raleigh discovered it in 1595 during his search for El Dorado. He used the tar to repair his ships and sailed away amazed. Trinidad's geology was literally building the modern world. Fact 4. What if I told you Trinidad is not technically a Caribbean island? Geologically, it is a fragment of South America. Around 10,000 years ago, rising sea levels at the end of the last ice age severed the island from Venezuela's mainland. The gap is just 11 kilometers, less than 7 miles. That's why Trinidad has howler monkeys, ocelots, and anteaters. No other Caribbean island has those animals, because no other Caribbean island was South America. Fact 5. Here's something that shouldn't exist on a Caribbean island. Trinidad has active mud volcanoes, not lava, thick, cool mud erupting from underground gas pressure. The most famous is the Devil's Woodyard. Early settlers heard rumbling and gurgling from the earth. They assumed the devil lived beneath it. They weren't entirely wrong. Fact 6. Tobago changed colonial hands 31 times. 31. France, England, Holland, and even Courland all fought over this small island. At just 116 square miles, Tobago was considered one of the most strategically valuable territories in the entire Caribbean. Every empire in Europe wanted it. Most of them lost it. Fact 7. Every single evening, something extraordinary happens in the Coroni Swamp. Thousands of scarlet ibis, brilliant crimson birds, return from feeding across Venezuela. They cross the Gulf of Paria in mass formations and descend into the mangroves like a living fire. The sky literally turns red. About 15,000 of them roost here at peak season. It is one of the most visually stunning wildlife spectacles in the Western Hemisphere. Fact 8. Robinson Crusoe is set on a fictional island, but for centuries, that fictional island has had a real address. Tobago's isolated terrain, history of shipwrecks, and dense, inaccessible forests make it the near-unanimous candidate for Robinson Crusoe's setting. Locals embraced it. The island is still called Robinson Crusoe Island in tourism literature. Treasure Island is also believed by many to be inspired by Tobago. One small island, two immortal adventure stories. Fact 9. Tobago has a forest that is 250 years old, not in age, but in legal protection. The Main Ridge Forest Reserve was established in 1776. That makes it the oldest legally protected rainforest in the Western Hemisphere. It was protected before the United States was even a country, before the first national park on Earth existed. A tiny Caribbean island beat the entire planet to conservation. Fact 10. Trinidad and Tobago sits squarely inside the Atlantic hurricane corridor. It is geographically surrounded by countries that get devastated every season. But Trinidad and Tobago is almost never struck. The islands sit too far south, just above 10 degrees north latitude. The atmospheric conditions that spin hurricanes into monsters rarely form this close to the equator. The country essentially sits in a geographic blind spot that saves it year after year. But that was just the beginning. Fact 11. Every spring, something ancient crawls out of the Atlantic onto Trinidad's beaches. Leatherback sea turtles, the largest reptiles on Earth, haul themselves ashore to nest. A single leatherback can weigh up to 2,000 pounds. Up to 10,000 of them use Trinidad's northern and eastern coasts each nesting season. In 2015, Time magazine named Trinidad the finest place on Earth to witness leatherback nesting. These animals have existed for 100 million years. They return here because they were born here. Fact 12. There is a natural swimming pool in the middle of the ocean off Tobago's coast. It's called the Nylon Pool. An offshore sandbar creates a sheltered lagoon only 1 meter deep. Crystal clear, warm, and sandy, it sits surrounded by open Caribbean Sea. You swim where there is no land beneath you for miles. Local legend says swimming in the Nylon Pool makes you forever young. Fact 13. Every single musical instrument invented in the 20th century can be traced back to one source: the steel pan drum. Invented in Trinidad in the 1930s by communities in Port of Spain, when British colonial authorities banned traditional African drums, musicians found a workaround. They began tuning discarded oil drums, bending the metal surface into notes. The steel pan is the only acoustic instrument invented in the last 100 years. Fact 14. Imagine a lake bigger than the ocean in your mind. The Nariva Swamp is Trinidad's largest freshwater wetland. 60 square kilometers of flooded forest, open marsh, and river delta. Inside it, anacondas, caimans, manatees, scarlet macaws, and boa constrictors. This isn't a zoo. This is an untamed interior wilderness on a Caribbean island. The swamp is protected under the Ramsar Convention, a global treaty for critical wetlands. It is a piece of the Amazon, stranded in the Caribbean. Fact 15. Here's something that shouldn't be possible on a small island. Trinidad has over 470 recorded bird species. That is more than most entire countries in the Caribbean combined. The reason goes back to Fact 4. Trinidad was South America. Its birds, its mammals, its insects all evolved on a continent. The sea walls it off from the mainland, but the biodiversity is still continental. Fact 16. Every year, scientists swim deep off Tobago's coast to visit a giant. At Kelliston Drain, near Little Tobago Island, sits the world's largest single-brain coral colony. It stands over 10 feet tall and measures 16 feet across. Brain coral grows roughly 1 centimeter per year. This colony is estimated to be over 1,000 years old. It was a living organism before Columbus ever sailed. Fact 17. Trinidad and Tobago has one of the smallest land areas of any oil-producing nation on Earth. Yet, it has been the largest supplier of liquefied natural gas to North America. The gas fields sit largely offshore, beneath the ocean floor. A country of 1.4 million people powers the heating and electricity of tens of millions across the continent. Its energy output per square kilometer rivals nations 20 times its size. The geology of a ripped-off piece of South America keeps on giving. Fact 18. Every 7 years, on average, something catastrophic erupts in the town of Piparo. A mud volcano beneath the settlement swells, cracks, and explodes upward. The 1997 eruption buried homes and vehicles in gray slurry overnight. Residents who had lived there for decades were displaced in hours. The government studies it. Scientists monitor it. People still live there, because where else do you go? Fact 19. There is a place in Trinidad where you can bathe in a volcano and walk to the ocean. The Lo Michel Mud Volcano sits deep in southern Trinidad, reachable only through an abandoned sugarcane plantation. The mud is volcanic in origin, but completely cool to the touch. It is so dense you cannot sink. You simply float on top. After your mineral bath, a 20-minute hike brings you to the coastline. You wash off in the Atlantic Ocean. The volcano and the ocean share the same address. Fact 20. Mini climax. Stop. Take this in. Trinidad's Pitch Lake has been churning for thousands of years. As it slowly turns over its vast black mass, it has surfaced the bones of animals that have been extinct for millennia. Mastodon teeth, giant sloth remains, Amerindian burial artifacts. The lake acts like a time capsule, devouring objects from the surface, preserving them in its airless depths, then returning them centuries later. Scientists have found microbes living deep inside the asphalt with no oxygen and no sunlight. They are among the most extreme life forms discovered in the Western Hemisphere. A lake of boiling tar, a geological freezer, a biological mystery, all in one place. Fact 21. Here's something that shouldn't exist in a Caribbean nation. Trinidad has wild ocelots, and howler monkeys, and giant anteaters. These are animals of the Amazon basin and the Venezuelan rainforest. They exist on Trinidad because when the island separated from South America, they came with it. A 1,864 square mile island holds the biodiversity of a continental rainforest. Fact 22. The oilbird is one of the strangest creatures alive. It navigates in complete darkness using echolocation, like a bat, but it is a bird. It feeds exclusively on the oily fruits of palm trees. Indigenous peoples once harvested its fat chicks by the thousands to use as lamp fuel. One of the most accessible wild oilbird colonies on Earth is in Dunstan Cave. A Caribbean island hosts one of the world's most scientifically bizarre birds. Fact 23. Tobago's ocean floor holds some of the most dramatic underwater terrain in the Atlantic Ocean. Rock pillars rise from the seafloor like drowned skyscrapers. Over 300 coral species have been cataloged here. Staghorn, black coral, fire coral, and tube sponges the size of cars. Manta rays glide through channels between underwater cliffs. The Caribbean-Atlantic boundary runs directly past the island, creating powerful converging currents. Those currents feed a reef system that rivals the Great Barrier Reef in biological complexity per square meter. Fact 24. What if I told you there's a freshwater swamp inside Trinidad that harbors wild manatees? The Nariva Swamp hosts one of the rarest manatee populations in the Caribbean. West Indian manatees, gentle, slow, critically threatened, move through its flooded channels. They share the water with anacondas and caimans and scarlet macaws overhead. A single freshwater marsh on a Caribbean island contains animals you would expect to find in the Pantanal. Because again, Trinidad was the Pantanal's neighbor. Fact 25. Every year between March and October, Grande Riviere Beach in northern Trinidad transforms. Hundreds of female leatherback sea turtles emerge simultaneously at night. Some nights, the beach is so crowded with nesting turtles, there is almost no sand visible. Each turtle digs her nest with her rear flippers, deposits up to 80 eggs, then returns to the sea. The hatchlings emerge weeks later, confused by light and disoriented. Community volunteers guide them by hand to the water. Without them, most would die before they reached the ocean. Fact 26. The steel pan was invented in Trinidad's most marginalized neighborhoods. Its creators were black Trinidadians who had been stripped of their drums under British colonial law. They transformed oil industry waste, discarded barrels, into an orchestra. Within 2 generations, this underground street instrument became Trinidad's national symbol. Today, steel bands perform classical symphonies, jazz, and film scores on instruments born in a garbage dump. The world's only 20th century acoustic instrument came from the people who had nothing. Fact 27. Here's something that seems impossible for a small island nation. In 2014, Trinidad and Tobago was the 3rd highest CO2 emitting country per capita on Earth. third highest in the world, after Qatar and Curaçao, a country of 1.4 million people. The reason? An energy economy almost entirely built on oil refining and natural gas processing. The same geology that makes it wealthy is the same geology slowly warming the ocean around it. Fact 28. There are bacteria living inside Pitch Lake that should not exist. In 2010, a team of international scientists analyzed microbial samples from deep within the asphalt. They found living organisms thriving in an environment with almost no water, no oxygen, and no light. Conditions similar to what might exist on the moons of Jupiter, specifically Europa and Titan. These microbes became a reference point for astrobiology. The lake in southwest Trinidad is now part of the scientific conversation about life in outer space. Fact 29. Tobago's forest is not just the oldest protected forest in the Western Hemisphere. It was protected for a deliberate, radical reason. In 1776, colonial authorities recognized that the island's rainfall and fresh water depended on the forest. They protected it not for beauty, but because they understood the hydrological link between trees and water. That insight, that cutting a forest changes a water cycle, was written into colonial law 250 years ago. Modern climatology arrived at the same conclusion 2 centuries later. Fact 30. Second escalation spike. Consider this sequence. Trinidad breaks off South America 10,000 years ago. It takes its South American wildlife with it. Ocelots, anteaters, howler monkeys, anacondas, manatees. It carries South American geology, oil fields, gas reserves, mud volcanoes, asphalt lakes. A Caribbean island carrying a continent's worth of secrets. For thousands of years, its Amerindian people leave behind pottery in the style of Orinoco Valley. The Cedros Peninsula holds burial sites 7,000 years old, the oldest settled territory in the entire Caribbean. The first Caribbean civilization began on an island that was still part of another continent when they arrived. The strangest part hasn't happened yet. Fact 31. Here's something that defies everything you know about hurricanes and islands. The Caribbean hurricane season runs from June to November and kills people every year across dozens of islands. But Trinidad and Tobago, perfectly positioned in the Caribbean Sea, is almost completely exempt. Its latitude, barely above 10 degrees north, sits below the zone where Atlantic tropical systems reach full hurricane strength. Only one significant hurricane, Hurricane Flora, has directly struck the islands in recorded modern history. 2 islands in the heart of hurricane country, protected by their own latitude. Fact 32. The world's largest brain coral is not in Australia. It is not in the Pacific. It is not in the Florida Keys. It sits at the bottom of the ocean off the coast of Tobago. A 16-foot wide living creature over 1,000 years old. It has survived wars, hurricanes, colonial invasions, and the Industrial Revolution. It continues to grow, 1 centimeter at a time, entirely unaware of everything that has happened above the waterline. Fact 33. Every single thing built on the roads of early New York City and Washington, D.C. was rolling over Trinidad. The asphalt extracted from Pitch Lake was shipped by the hundreds of thousands of tons to pave East Coast American cities. The roads of early industrial America were built on the byproduct of a Caribbean island's ancient geology. When you think of the history of U.S. infrastructure, the Model T, early automobiles, the growth of American cities, part of that story happened in La Brea, a mud lake in the Caribbean helped build the modern world. Fact 34. The Trinidad piping guan, called the pawi locally, exists nowhere else on Earth. Only wild population on the planet, northern Trinidad's rainforests. This bird is critically endangered. If it goes extinct in those forests, it goes extinct everywhere. There is no backup population, no captive colony to save it. The entire global survival of this species rests on one stretch of rainforest, on one island, in one country. Fact 35. In the Nariva swamp, blue and gold macaws were reintroduced in the late 1990s. They had been locally extinct, hunted out and trapped for the peck trade. The Cincinnati Zoo partnered with local conservationists to fly birds back in. A zoo in Ohio brought macaws back to a Caribbean swamp. Today, wild flocks of blue and gold macaws wheel over the flooded forests of Nariva again. It is one of the most successful reintroduction programs in Caribbean conservation history. Fact 36. Here's the real cost of what Pitch Lake has given the world. The lake contains an estimated 10 million tons of asphalt. It has been commercially mined since the 1860s. Millions of tons have been extracted, and yet the lake continues to refill. Geologists believe the asphalt rises from a deep underground reservoir through a fault system. The lake regenerates itself. You cannot empty it. Humanity has been trying for 160 years. Fact 37. Trinidad was the birthplace of the first Black Miss Universe. Janelle Commission, a Trinidadian woman, won in 1977. But the story goes deeper than pageantry. Her win came against the backdrop of a country that had only been independent for 15 years. A small island nation, 1.4 million people, producing a global first on the world's largest beauty stage. It was one of the signal moments in post-colonial Caribbean identity, an island once owned by 7 European empires, declaring, through her, that it owned itself now. Fact 38. The Caroni Swamp hides something that most visitors never notice. Spectacled caimans, small crocodilians, hunt silently in its channels after dark. Boa constrictors drape themselves in mangrove branches above the water. What tourists see as a beautiful bird sanctuary is also a functioning predator ecosystem operating on top of, inside of, and around the same waterway. The scarlet ibis lands. The caiman waits beneath. The most beautiful thing in the swamp and the most dangerous share the same water. Fact 39. The Banwari trace discovery changed Caribbean history. In the 1970s, archaeologists excavating Banwari Trace in southwestern Trinidad unearthed the skeletal remains of a woman. She was buried roughly 7,000 years ago. Radiocarbon dating confirmed this as the oldest confirmed human burial in the entire Caribbean. The pottery found around her carried the artistic fingerprints of Orinoco Valley, 300 miles away. She was not from the Caribbean. She was from the continent. She crossed a sea, built a life, and became, in death, the oldest known Caribbean resident. Fact 40. The final revelation. Here is what Trinidad and Tobago actually is. It is not a Caribbean island, not in any geological sense. It is a fragment of South America, physically ripped away by rising seas, carrying its wildlife, its geology, its soils, and its people's history from another continent. It hosts the oldest human settlement in the Caribbean, the world's only asphalt lake that cannot be emptied, the largest natural gas exporter in North America relative to its size, the birthplace of the only acoustic instrument invented in the 20th century, the nesting ground that sustains the largest sea turtle species alive, the oldest legally protected forest in the Western Hemisphere, the only wild population of a bird that exists nowhere else on Earth, and bacteria in its asphalt that scientists use to theorize about life on other planets. This is not an island. It is a geological riddle, a biological ark, and a cultural miracle, all in one place. Just 7 miles from Venezuela, technically Caribbean, essentially something else entirely. Geography doesn't just shape borders. It shapes what is possible, what animals survive, what music gets invented, what ancient humans carry across open water. Trinidad and Tobago is proof that the most extraordinary places on Earth don't announce themselves. They sit quiet, a fragment of continent adrift in the Caribbean, slowly turning a lake of black tar over and over, returning the past to the surface, one ancient bone at a time.